Good morning, everyone. Nice to see you all. I've just come from the Unitarian Universalist Musicians Network Conference in Madison, Wisconsin, where I had a chance to talk with Elizabeth Norton, who wrote this song, There Is a Love, which we're going to sing as our first hymn. And I thought it might be helpful for us to review it in the manner that she conceived it, which was as a canon. We've always sung it as a unison. So this looks like a pretty stout bunch here. So we'll just see what happens if we do canon 1, canon 2. So you see the lyrics in your order of service there, order of celebration. We'll sing the first verse twice. First, as an entire congregation, and secondly, in canon form with you all leading and this group following. So let's try that right now. Just those first 3 notes of the... And we sing, there is a love holding me. There is a love holding all that I love. There is a love holding all I rest in. And we'll sing it again right now. There is a love and we'll sing it again right now. There is a love that I love. There is a love holding all I rest in this. And now we'll sing verse 2. There is a love holding us. There is a love holding. Verse 2, holding us. There is a love holding us. There is a love holding. We rest. And we go to the ending. Love. We sing we rest again. We rest in love. One more time. We rest. We rest in this love. And that will be our first hymn. Good for you. Thank you.
Good morning, and happy Harry Potter Day. Welcome to Cedar Lane Unitarian Universalist Church. Cedar Lane is a liberal religious community where we gather to explore the eternal, to nurture community, and to build a more just world. We are a community where love works. Whoever you are, whomever you love, wherever you are on your spiritual journey and whatever your life circumstance, you are welcome here. If you are new to Cedar Lane this morning, we have a small gift for you. So if you're new here, will you please raise your hands so that we can get that to you? Great. Please keep it raised so that we can get that gift back to you. We're so glad that you chose to join us this morning for worship. All are invited to linger after the service to enjoy coffee and conversation. If you choose to use a yellow mug, our members and friends will be sure to greet you. Before we move into our worship time, I'd like to call your attention to the news insert in your order of celebration with information about this week's and other upcoming events in our church community. I especially draw your attention to the one at the top right about getting together to see what our church says. So trying to look through the eyes of what visitors might see. We'll be meeting and doing that right after the service. I hope that you can join us for that. And now I'd like to invite you to turn and briefly to greet your immediate neighbors. Bringing our enthusiasm and our connections together, we enter this, our time of worship. Come, let us worship together. Here to face the truth about ourselves, about this faith we love, and the ways it presently serves others in the world.
As well as to open ourselves to ways it can better and more joyfully reflect our potential and core values.
We want to know the ways we are bound to one another, as well as to larger religious movements normally beyond our sight and vision.
We say we are open and diverse.
Yet it is too easy to feel stuck in old paths and stubborn habits, reflecting not so much tradition as our comfort.
We want to answer the call to service to a world that needs our message, our hope, our revived energy.
So we are gathered to learn, to unlearn, to hear, and to move forward.
As Jim and Maureen McNulty kindle the chalice, symbol of our gathered community, please rise in body or in spirit to share in unison the chalice lighting words printed in your order of celebration. For centuries, people have told stories, celebrated life, and approached the ultimate while gathered around a fire. Today, we light this chalice that the hearth fire of our hearts may be rekindled, that our stories may be retold, that we might celebrate life anew, that we might approach our calling as Unitarian Universalists. Remain as you are for our next song, There Is a Love. The words are in your order of celebration, and the choir will be helping us along. We gather in this sacred space of community to find strength, the spiritual, emotional, and even physical strength to face the many challenges of our lives. In this time of reflection, we lift up those in our community who are living through significant passages in the small and extraordinary milestones of life. We're sorry to announce the death of William Buell, husband of Marjorie Reines. The service celebrating his life will be held here this coming Saturday at 3 p.m. We continue to hold in our hearts all those whose lives are lost and whose loved ones' lives are lost to violence in our world. We hold those killed in D.C. and Austin, Texas, and their families and communities, especially this week. May these friends of ours and our companions in the world and all that lives unspoken in our hearts be held in the embrace of prayer and in the peace that stillness of silence brings.
I invite you to settle in for a moment of meditation and prayer. A poem by Robert Walsh. When the great plates slip and the earth shivers, and the flaw is seen to live in what you trusted the most, look not to more solidity, to weighty slabs of concrete poured, or the strength of steel beam to save the fractured order. Trust more the tensile strands of love that stretch and bend to hold you in the web of life that's often torn but always healing. The shifting plates, the restive earth, your room, your precious, precious life. They all proceed from love, the ground on which we walk together. In our time of silence, if you are remembering a loss or commemorating the anniversary of a loss, you're invited to stand in mourning and memory until our music begins.
I am not going to tell you how, after 20 years of being unchurched, I discovered Unitarian Universalism. Others have given such testimonials and done it well. I am going to speak briefly about my life as a UU, how this faith forms the basis of who I am and how I choose to live my life. My UU life is like a tapestry. A tapestry is a weaving in which the warp threads are mostly hidden in the completed work, unlike cloth weaving where both the warp and weft threads are visible. In tapestry weaving, threads of different colors are worked over the warp to form the design. The warp threads of my life are the UU7 principles. The weft are the passions that have been my lifelong pursuits: teaching, music, writing, poetry, horticulture, and lifelong learning. To illustrate, I have been teaching throughout my adult life. First, language arts in middle and high school, then as a writing and organizational trainer for business and industry. Most recently, as a UU, I have taught classes about plants, trees, and poetry. Thank you for that nice little interlude. Another thread is music. While I am not a trained musician, I love singing, and Cedar Lane has given me the opportunity to sing in Grupo Piccolo and summer choir. There are also opportunities to enjoy the music of others, the Capitol Jazz Band, the Cedar Lane Choir, and musicians from both inside and outside of the congregation. In the Davenport church I attended before moving to Rockville, I met my poetry mentor, an Irish woman several years my senior. We would meet for tea, she would critique my poems, and then we would read some of her poems or the poems of some other poet. That we were both UUs from vastly different backgrounds is one of the most inspiring experiences I have had. The uniting theme in all of this is lifelong learning. I do admit to loving learning for its own sake, but in my search for truth, I learn something or gain insight at nearly every service. I attend forums, I take adult RE classes, I participate in various teams, and I teach. Some of you are probably thinking, well, she's not so special. Lots of people do things like that, and more. You're right, but remember those hidden warp threads? Those threads are my spiritual core, my UU faith enhanced and strengthened by the activities in which I engage. Yet, my tapestry will never be finished. Finally, I am blessed in having learned gratitude, by realizing satisfaction in serving others, by having accepted that sorrow, grief, and challenge, as well as joy, are the threads of all of our lives, and by knowing and believing in the power of love. I live by this motto, bloom where you are planted, and its corollary, just don't go to seed.
This reading is titled Truthers by Tom Owen Toll. Unitarian Universalists see ourselves as inveterate truth seekers. However, there is more to this truth business than merely searching for it. It becomes the fate of free thinkers to stake our lives on incomplete but satisfactory data, penultimate values, if you will. We never enjoy total truth, only a sufficient supply of it. And so we must live by successive approximations of the good, the loving, the beautiful. But again, there is more to this truth business than merely seeking it. In addition to seeking truth and finding truth, there is facing truth. An unremitting readiness to confront the facts can prove unsettling. There are truths we would rather ignore. Truths about ourselves, our inherited assumptions, our backgrounds, our partners, even our cherished ideologies. But the mission of Unitarian Universalism remains to come together and, fortified with the nudges and embraces of companions, to stand tall and face whatever harsh truths existence delivers. There is more, he goes on. Speaking the truth is also an imperative for free thinkers. Telling the truth is more complicated than lying or remaining silent. We belong to a legacy of prophets who assailed the social and theological orthodoxies of their day. Unitarian Universalists seek after the truth, find some, face more, and tell as much as we can. Finally, whether we actualize our truths in daily life constitutes the litmus test of free-thinking mystics with hands. Unitarian Universalist Buckminster Fuller said that truth is a verb. You and I belong to a reasonable faith, but we are scarcely a band of intellectuals. Rather, we are drafted to be truth doers who lug with our own hands the necessary timbers to build a more just and joyful world. Now, before I go on, I figured out why our sound cut out on us. Y'all want to know? So in a moment, I'm about to talk about my time with the faithful fools. And while I wasn't going the trickster route, trickster is absolutely part of the fools, so trickster had to show up at our service today, just to give us some extra joyful music to mix in, along with our fabulous music. Thank you all so much this morning. According to a survey a few years back, Unitarian Universalists are comprised of more women than men, 59% as opposed to 41%. We have a median age of 52, and more than half of our members are over 55. We are more racially diverse than in 1990, although that is largely due to an increase in those who identified as Hispanic in this particular study. We are highly educated, with a postgraduate rate 3 times the U.S. average. Our number of retirees is growing, and the percentage of folks who identify as Democrats is twice the national average. In fact, I read somewhere, this gets worse, and I wish I could remember where, I read that the membership rolls of Unitarian Universalist congregations were either most closely correlated with the mailing list for National Geographic or that of LL Bean catalog. Thank goodness that is not really who we are. In all those statistics, there's more that I didn't say than what I did. Yes, we're more female than male. But Cedar Lane, along with many UU congregations and groups, have done some really excellent work in welcoming and hosting folks who are transgender or non-gender conforming in some way. Being a Unitarian Universalist means being part of a multi-gender community. And yes, we have a median age of 52, and over half of UUs are over 55, which shouldn't surprise anyone in the room. But 11% of adults who identify as UU are under 30. A total of 42% of our rolls are under 55. And of course, then our children and youth. And if anyone questions whether they are a force to be reckoned with, I tell you, just take a look at our youth services, take a look at our youth caucus at General Assembly, take a look at what our youth are doing. Being a UU means being part of a multi-age, intergenerational community. And we are growing in our racial and cultural diversity, although we still have a long ways to go in that regards. And while we are highly educated, by the way, that is one of the most frequently cited statistics about UUs, that postgraduate education statistic, but that only makes up 25% of us. It's a little misleading. Another quarter of us completed college, then 36% some college, and then 11% more some high school or tech school. That's a far different picture than I usually hear when I hear these statistics being rattled off. And that political statistic, I put it slightly differently. I think our number of Republicans actually hovers closer to 20 to 25%. Being a Unitarian Universalist means being part of a diverse community indeed. And as interesting as this all is, it still doesn't get to the heart of what it means to be a Unitarian Universalist. I admit that I struggled with this question as I was preparing for today. It's a different question than what UUs believe or what we hold in common. What does it mean to be a UU? As I started looking for common actions or common inspiration for action, I ran into yet another problem with trying to answer this question. For any given action I could come up with, I could find folks from a wide variety of religious traditions and folks who didn't even associate with a religious tradition who would also take that same action. The truth is, there isn't any particular litmus test where if you see this particular thing, bingo, they must be a UU. We are just too diverse for that. And then with the changing and evolving meaning of membership, looking to see who's on the rolls with the congregation doesn't cover it either. But thankfully, we do have some common threads in our calling as Unitarian Universalists. Our quest for truth, and what we do with that quest is one of those threads. Tom Owen Toll calls us truthers. I kind of like that. We're truthers. Over on the side of what UUs believe, you find that believing in truth with a lowercase t, that is, that there are many truths and not a single overriding truth. There's a belief that each person has a right to their own search for their own truths. But that's only a very small part of being a truther. Being defined and charged by truth like that means not only seeking the truth, but also speaking it, facing it, and doing the truth. So let's go through all of those one by one. Speaking the truth. It's a core part of advocacy and justice work. And I especially experienced this during my time with the trickster-ridden Faithful Fools ministry. The Faithful Fools are a community ministry in one of the most impoverished areas of San Francisco. Their ministry includes accompaniment, hosting retreats, being a community center, and then, of course, advocacy. And there's a very particular significance to their advocacy, the word fool. So traditionally, the fool had a particular role in the king's court. And in part, this is where the name of the Faithful Fools came from. The role of the fool was to tell the king what no one else could, essentially to tell the king when he was full of it. The fool had no rank, and therefore challenging the king wasn't seen as an attempt to gain power. The fool's role was to speak truth to power. To speak truth to the power that the king was. Channeling that brings us to modern day advocacy work. Our speaking truth to power. And it is not only speaking truth to power, sometimes it's speaking truth when you are the person who is in power. I've heard many stories of Unitarian Universalists living out their faith this way, bringing their values and their truths to bear in their own positions of power. And here in the Beltway area, there's even more folks who have power in some way. Speaking truth to power, speaking truth with power. These are parts of being a truther. So we have seeking the truth, speaking the truth, and then there is also the hard work of facing the truth. UU minister and military chaplain Brett Lordy found us facing some truth a few years ago. Here is his story. Thinking about my experience as a 2013 General Assembly chaplain, he tells us, the issue I heard about wasn't the one I thought I would be hearing the most about, but rather the issue I heard about the most, he said, was gender-neutral bathrooms. These became the forum in which many of us confronted our own categorical thinking. The gender-neutral bathrooms were established in response to a number of attendees at General Assembly who pointed out that binary distinctions such as male and female didn't describe their experience of gender. They shared their experiences of being challenged because they looked too feminine for the men's room or too masculine for the women's room. So the General Assembly planners did the right thing by making several of our bathrooms gender neutral. But this one issue brought more people to the doors of the chaplain's office than any other. As I listened to attendees process their experiences and their adventures into the uncharted territories of urinals and sanitary canisters, I realized their primary discomfort focused around understanding the non-binary gender associations that they were being asked to consider. For many of them, often it was the first time. They felt pushed into their zones of discomfort, and this fouled them up more than any politics or gender theory may have. Now, as far as association controversies go, this was a cakewalk for me as a chaplain, he says. A little listening, a few nudges toward compassion regarding the shared experience of being human, some gentle reminders of our values, and most visits ended well. I was encouraged by how much people wanted in their heart of hearts, how much they wanted to confront their polar thinking and existing biases, even when it came to bathrooms and even when it was uncomfortable for them. Facing our truths. This is a key part of being a Unitarian Universalist. Being willing to challenge ourselves, putting ourselves into positions of feeling challenged, feeling uncomfortable, and growing as a result. We talk a lot about supporting the spiritual journeys and spiritual growth of ourselves and others, but this is taking us a step further, pushing ourselves to grow and pushing ourselves to consider new truths. And this is very much the opposite of the false notion that you congregations are a place where you can believe whatever you want, a sort of fruit basket religion where anything goes. Have any of y'all heard that one? Nothing could be further from the truth. Because if this were the case, there wouldn't have been a single person coming to the chaplain's office to confront their discomfort with gender-neutral bathrooms. They wouldn't have bothered because they could believe whatever they wanted, right? Not at all. Instead, person after person came for a little support while they confronted new realities and new truths that came into conflict with their existing beliefs and biases. That's our UU values provoking us to growth and provoking us to change. Ultimately, being a Unitarian Universalist comes down, through all of these things, it comes down to doing the truth and acting on our values, making choices based on our shared commitments, doing the truth. This is what I see in the story of one particular UU by the name of Tim DeChristopher. Back in 2008, near the end of the Bush administration, there was a controversial land auction. Many thousands of acres were gifted by President Bush for sale at auction to gas and oil companies. These acres in Utah were located right alongside national parks and protected areas, and many were protesting the auction, including, but not limited to, many environmentalists. One of those upset about the auction was Tim DeChristopher, a local college student and a Unitarian Universalist. His story of the day of the auction goes something like this. He felt something had to be done, but still wasn't sure exactly what. He was willing to take some risks, though, and knew that there may be consequences for him to face. He walked up to the room where the auction was taking place, and the person standing at the door asked him if he was there for the auction. He said, "Why, yes, I am." Then they asked if he was there to bid. He said, "Why, yes, I am." They issued him a bidding paddle by which his protest was later known by, a paddle with the number 70 on it. As the auction went on, there was a moment for Tim when he knew he had to act and take on the consequences for his protest. There's actually a photograph of this moment, which they tried to use against him later at his trial. It's a photograph of Tim looking over his shoulder towards the back of the room. The prosecutor said it made him look suspicious. No, says Tim, he was looking back at another member of his UU congregation who was sitting and sobbing at the back of the room. He saw her and he started bidding. 12 parcels of land later, totaling almost $2 million in money, the auction came to a screeching halt when folks realized what he had been doing. The auction was canceled and later found to be illegal. And Tim, he served 21 months in prison for his civil disobedience that day. This is doing our truths, putting our truths into action. One of the quotes that Tim said inspired him is this: "Sentiment without action is the ruin of the soul." Sentiment without action is the ruin of the soul. And this isn't just action he was doing. Civil disobedience is a particular kind of action where one is willing to risk suffering for one's principles, to risk suffering for one's truth. Now, there's another element of Tim's story that shouldn't go without mentioning. In part, Tim was able to take the risks that he did and to possibly to face only the sentence that he faced because of his position of privilege. This is because Tim is a young, healthy, white man. I was reminded of this fact recently here after a vigil that we had just a few weeks ago. In the discussion that followed the service, we began talking about actions that could be taken, but also about what actions were safer for others to take on because of their race or other identities or other factors. A position of privilege is a form of power that changes the level of risk for folks in different situations. Tim's position of privilege no doubt affected how much he was able to do, perhaps even affected the fact that they were willing to give him a bidding paddle without question. But being a UU doesn't mean all of us taking the same set of actions. Being a UU means to simply act on our truths. It means to use the power that we each have, to use the power we have collectively to risk our truths. Now, a word that comes up when we talk about risk a lot is courage. But I say we don't have to have tons of courage to be able to do this either. It isn't a courage game. In fact, I have to share, I am a complete chicken when it comes to a lot of stuff like this. Let me go back to my time serving with the Faithful Fools. The city had just passed some controversial legislation that prohibited folks from sitting on the sidewalks during daylight. Now, it was actually a serious deal because San Francisco is a city without very many public benches and with a high degree of homelessness. So this was a particularly cruel law to a particularly disadvantaged portion of the city's population. One day I was walking up to the Faithful Fools building, and there was a woman sitting on the sidewalk by the door. She didn't have a connection with the Fools, but I recognized her because I had seen her around. And at the moment I walked up, a police car drove up. A police officer got out and looked at the woman. I was instantly terrified of this guy. Young white guy with an "I'm more powerful than you" look about him. And instead of running to escape the situation, which was my first inclination, something made me not. I stopped, I turned and faced the police officer and stared back at him. I think I probably crossed my arms, but that was more so he couldn't see my hands shaking. I was terrified and there was no courage anywhere in me. After a minute, he got in the car and left. Do I know what I would have done if he had walked over and escalated the situation? I'm not sure, but I hope I would have stood my ground. The chicken part of me certainly acknowledged the immunity of privilege that I had, no doubt. But still, a chicken I was, and I managed to stay put. What does it mean to be a Unitarian Universalist? It means to be a truther. It means seeking our truths, speaking our truths, facing our truths, acting and doing our truths, and finally, risking our truths. That is a lot to ask, and so I am really glad that I'm not in this alone. Sometimes, as I'm working on a question, I take a look in the common text of Unitarian Universalist to see if I can find some answers. Common text, you ask? Anyone know what it is? Here we go. What book is present in virtually every UU congregation? One hymn in particular stood out to me today. It's on my personal top 10 list as well. We'll be singing it in just a few minutes. Standing on the Side of Love, number 1014, if you want to take a preview peek. It was written by UU minister Jason Shelton. To me, it's an answer to what is it that we are motivated to do by our faith when we get together. What does it mean to be a Unitarian Universalist? Now this hymn, it's got a nice tempo and feel to it, and the musical directions at the top say even with passion and dignity. Sounds about right, with passion and dignity. If you look in it, you see truth, promise, hope, some self-made barriers as well. And then standing together on the side of our truths and on the side of the great universalist love in our world. What does it mean to be a UU? Today, I think this sums it up for me. May we ever find ways to stand together through all of the bumps and barriers on our way. Stand together with our many truths and our varied positions of privilege and power. Uniting together, facing our truths, and risking for them. May it be so.
The offering is an invitation to demonstrate a commitment to the mission and ministry of our congregation and to the common values expressed in our Unitarian Universal principles. Our offering reminds us that our congregation belongs to us, to each of us, as well as to the whole of us. It is an extension of our gratitude for our spiritual home, where we are invited to be who we are, as we are, and to live lives of joy, hope, integrity, and service. The offering to sustain the work and ministry of Cedar Lane Unitarian Universalist Church will now be given and gratefully received. Thank you for your generosity.
What does it mean to be a Unitarian Universalist? Y'all ready to sing the answer with me? All right, please rise in body or in spirit, and let's sing number 1014, Standing on the Side of Love. Y'all got your passion and dignity ready? All right, let's sing.
We
That'll help. Let me try that again. A bright new day is dawning when love and truth will not divide us. May we keep daring to proclaim our love and our faith together and through what we do in the world. And remember, you're never all alone. Blessed be.